morning, everyone. It's good to be with you this morning. Welcome to Margaret Street Church of Christ. We're glad you are with us this morning for our 9 o'clock Bible study hour. If you are joining us for the first time, well, we're glad to have you. We're right in the middle of a study of the life of Christ, where we're going through and studying the chronological order of our Lord Jesus Christ, and according to what we read in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Before we get started this morning, let's have a prayer. And I want to ask Brother Rick if he wouldn't mind leading us in a prayer this morning.
Would you bow with me? Father, we thank you for the many blessings of this day. We're thankful, Father, for the opportunity we have this morning and later this day to worship you and to pray that the things that are presented will be done in a well-pleasing manner and acceptable in your sight. Father, we ask that you be with those of our congregation at this time that's dealing with illness and sick and disease. If it be your will, you will give them back their health and be back with us. Pray for those that are traveling and keep them safe. In Jesus' name, amen.
If you want to open your Bibles to Luke chapter 1. Thank you, Brother Rick, for that. Luke chapter 1 is where we'll be beginning this morning. It's where we left off this past week. We just got into the text, beginning our text of this harmony of the Gospels, and I have a copy here, if I can get some help passing this out. This is just the first page of several, and it might have some changes upcoming. But this is the harmony of the Gospel accounts. Many of you, if you'll look in your Bibles, you probably have a harmony of the Gospels. Somewhere in the back pages, a lot of times in your study Bibles, you'll have a harmony where they'll take the events of the life of Christ and they will spread them across or show you where you can find those in the 4 different accounts. Good morning. And so this is the one that I've been following. It's one that I have borrowed as well as developed over the years. I've changed a few things, added a few things, clarified a few things. Every harmony that you will come across will have a little bit of variances in them. They're going to look at certain events as related or certain events as happening before or after another one. And so this is why a harmony of the Gospels, the Gospel accounts, is so important to have, is so it helps you kind of put in line all the different events that take place in the life of Christ. So on this one, when I refer to event number 1, number 2, number 3, we're going to be following along with this. And if you will, bring this with you to class each time. When we refer to those events, this is what I'm referring to, are these different events. So this morning, we're actually in number 2, Luke's purpose of writing. Number 1 was God becomes human, and that's where we went back to the pre-existence time in John 1 through 18, and talked about his pre-existence and how the Word became flesh. I only had about 50 of those, and so, interrupting what I was saying here, 50 of those, so if you didn't get one, if somebody would share, we can get some more copies for you at another time. So I have a lot more here this morning than I was expecting, and it's a good thing. So we talked about in number 1, God becoming human, and we talked about the Word becoming flesh, and all those aspects of what that Word is. He is God, He is light, He is life, and how that relates to our story. And now we've moved into number 2, if you will, in the list, and that is Luke's purpose for writing, and that's where we're at in Luke chapter 1, verse 1 through 4. If I can have a volunteer read out verses 1 through 4 of Luke chapter 1.
Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. It has seemed good to me also, having had a perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you in an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed.
Okay. What we have here is a lot of information, and as we spoke about just a little bit last week with our introduction to Luke, we're going to be introducing each one of the Gospels as we get to that certain point in the chronological order. In this case, you remember we talked about Luke as one of the writers of these Gospel accounts, wrote to the Greeks specifically as his audience. And so the way that Luke is going to approach things is going to be a bit different than Matthew, Mark, or John. And that is that he's going to explain things because he's going to understand that the Greeks don't necessarily understand the theological terms he's going to be using. We talked about the purpose of his writing and the introductory style that he has here that we're starting with, these salutations. Remember, we talked about how that was part of their custom, is to have these specific type of introductions that we don't really use much anymore in the United States, of just simply saying hello before we continue our email or our text or something. And so this is very common and standard in their culture. But now we're going to continue forward and talk about a little bit more of this passage. First of all, what we see by implication of the things that Luke says here. When he says, we've talked about, many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of these things. It seemed good to me also, says verse 3. So what we have here, Luke obviously sees something lacking. It caused him to undertake this project, and it resulted in a 2-volume work. We read more from the pen of Luke than we do anybody else in the New Testament. What's the other book that Luke wrote? Hebrews. I thought, you have some different revelation. The book of Acts. So we have, basically what we have, Luke begins further back than any of the other gospel accounts, and he goes much further beyond than any other gospel account. So he begins with the birth of John the Baptist and follows the gospel message all the way to Rome in Acts chapter 28. So Luke here, if you'll see, he uses 3 sources. One of the things we talked about with Luke is that he's a specific type of person. We know this from Colossians. What was Luke? It's a physician. And so physicians are a lot of times very studied people. They have extensive knowledge in many areas. And so Luke is definitely a researcher. In fact, he's been called a historian of the utmost quality. And so in this case, he shows why, he gives his credibility of why he's going to do this and how he goes about doing it. So in verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having a perfect understanding of all things. Does anybody have a different rendering, a different way it's written there? Having investigated everything carefully. Anything else? Perfect understanding, having investigated. Any other variances of that verse? All right. This is a very specific word that Luke uses here, and depending on what version you have, the NIV, the NASB, as well as the International Standard Version, they say followed closely. The English Standard Version says traced the course, and the ASV and King James, New King James, say perfect understanding. This word that he actually uses here is parakaleo. I think that's in my next one here. Let's see if I go back, or did I have it right there? There it is. It was already on there. Parakolodeseo. Now, you don't need to remember that. What that means, though, it's a compound word, and it carries with it this idea of like a pesky reporter. You're just always right there, ready to write down every little thing, like an investigator. Imagine a private eye. You know, he has his pen and paper out, and he's looking at every little thing and taking notes and pictures and noting every little detail. That's the character of this word. And so that's what, by meaning following closely. So Luke has then 3 specific things that he has. He has, first, he uses events that he or his audience have participated in, things that have been fulfilled. In other words, this has already happened, and so he's using that as part of his sources of investigation. The other thing are the things that have been written. He says those things that have passed on as others. And then also he admits up front that he is not an eyewitness, but he is using eyewitness accounts. And a lot of times, even in the court of law, those eyewitness accounts carry more weight with them than anything else a lot of times. And so Luke is using three different resources to give us this information. So what he's saying is, you can count on this. I have done my research. I have followed closely behind, looking at and investigating all this so that you will have a very orderly account. And then he goes on, in this he's saying this perfect understanding in all things. He's saying all things. In other words, he looked at everything. From Luke, we get a better understanding of the beginnings of the Christian church. Without the book of Acts, we would know nothing about what happened after Jesus was on this earth. Without Luke, we wouldn't know much about the life in a orderly manner of the life of Christ. And then he says, he goes from the beginning. Luke is the only gospel writer who gives us an account of the birth of John the Baptist. And so he goes, as I mentioned, a little further back than the other accounts of the gospel, and then he goes much further beyond. Then he says carefully, and that's that word, better is accurately. His investigation was very careful and precise and accurate. And then he gives, what he says, an orderly account. Not that everything is in perfect order that he writes, but that it is at least presented in a way that you will be able to follow and understand very clearly. And most of what Luke writes is indeed in chronological order. The harmony of the gospel that I passed out, that's going to follow more Luke's chronological order more than anything else. And so as we progress through our study of Christ, we're going to see more following his and looking at the others. When I say that, for example, if you look at the different verses for Luke going down through those events, you'll see that Luke follows one right after the other, whereas Matthew is going to jump around. It might jump from chapter 8 back to chapter 12 it's going to jump around according to the subject that we're dealing with. That's because Matthew, which we will talk about in just a few moments, writes in terms of topics instead of this chronological order. This idea of chronological order is more of a Western expectation. We like to have everything in perfect order from beginning to end. The Hebrews did not write that way. Lots of cultures don't write in that particular order. So, who does he write this to? He writes it to, excellent Theophilus. I just love that word. It's such an interesting word. And so why is he writing this most excellent Theophilus? Well, there's several things we could say about this. Most excellent, first of all, whenever you're going to say that, that sounds quite interesting whenever you are going to address somebody that way. Most excellent Andrea. How are you today? It sounds rather strange, doesn't it? Most excellent is a title that typically in this particular era was given to the equestrian rank. Equestrian means cavalry, with horses. Or to governors. You might remember that's how Felix and Festus were referred to. Most excellent governor, procurator, or something like that. So this is a title that's given. So obviously Theophilus is somebody very important, and that's why he receives this. Now the word Theophilus is actually a compound word, two words. The word theos, which is where we get our word God. It means God. And then philo, or philos, which is love. And so it is one that is loved by God. It is friend of God, loved of God. And so this word is quite interesting that if that's his name, some people think that it just is a reference to those who love God and to the saints in general. And so really all of us are Theophilus. And that's why I love that name. It's one of my favorite words I like to use for example, a lot of times an online activity or something like that, that's a username that I'll use, is Theophilus, because it means one who loves God or loved of God. However, in this case, it could be that it is associated with someone whom Luke wants to convert to the faith. In other words, he's trying to convince this person of the things that they're about to read, or he's trying to strengthen their faith. And so, I tend to lean towards the second, that he's trying to strengthen their faith, because he's saying, I'm going to put all this in an orderly account that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed, in past tense. And so these are things that he's already learned, and so he's just strengthening his faith. It's also possible that this is a Roman official that Luke is trying to convince about Christianity being a legal religion. You got to understand that when Christianity began, it was confused at first with the Jewish religion. And so since they already had the Jewish religion, they were able to move about, Christians were able to move about without much difficulty, until they started to realize there was a difference between Christianity and Judaism, and then the persecution started and different obstacles were presented. And so in this case, it's possible that Luke, writing many years later, is trying to convince this Roman official that this is a legal religion. Another strong possibility is that Theophilus is the patron or the sponsor of this writing. It's not uncommon for a writer to have someone who pays for or gives him a salary or publishes the book for him. So it's possible that Theophilus is that person as well. Either way, we don't know. It's just interesting conversation. But the word Theophilus and its meaning, to me, is what carries the most. Now, he says that we come into the purpose of the book in verse 4, so that you may know with certainty the things that were taught. Okay, let's turn over to John. Put your finger here and turn over to John 20, verse 31, real quick, and read that verse. If somebody will read that. And these kind of go in harmony with each other, in my opinion. John 20, verse 31.
But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in him.
So in your study Bible, right beside verse 4, put John 20, verse 31. Luke is saying that you may know with certainty of the things in which you were instructed. So he is presenting all these things. He's about to present all these things in an orderly account so that you may understand who Jesus Christ is and have no doubt. It's interesting that over the centuries, there have been many people who've tried to prove Luke wrong. Sir Ramsay in the 1800s, went over to Jerusalem to prove Luke wrong, and came away saying Luke is one of the finest historians that there's ever been, because he was so incredibly accurate in all the details. Once archaeology and topology and all the different things were brought into play, it comes to find out, or it resulted in the fact that Luke is indeed a fine historian. So this Theophilus and the broader Christian community are going to receive this instruction about Christ. And then he goes on to talk about the beginning of the church. Now, I believe this is very important, to strengthen your faith so that you may know the certainty, with certainty, those things. Whenever I had fallen away from the church, and whenever I came back to the church, one of the first things that I remember telling Andrea was, I don't want to believe just for the sake of believing. I want to know these things. I want to know for a fact that God exists, or that Jesus was real, or these things. And of course, that was a little naive on my part. But at the same time, I discovered and began studying and strengthened my faith through Christian evidences. Have y'all heard of or know of Christian evidences? We've had a few seminars here with some of the folks from apologeticspress.org. By the way, is a great website. If you ever have a question about discrepancy, a supposed discrepancy in the Bible, or if you want to know about the historicity of Jesus Christ or any archaeological evidence that supports the Bible, please go to apologeticspress.org and enter in your information. You'll find a lot. Another great resource is Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, or Josh McDowell, who wrote two different books. One is called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, or New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And both of those are Christian evidence-based books that show the factual historicity of Jesus Christ. He's a real person who walked on the face of the earth, and all of these things are supported in many different ways, much more detailed and complicated than what we could enter in this class period right now. But these are the type of things that Luke's talking about. Theophilus, I'm going to give you some facts and some data and some information that is irrefutable so that you may know with certainty of who we're talking about. How many of you, for example, how many of you believe that China exists? Okay, how do you know that China exists? How many of you have been to China? Let's just get that off the table. We have a couple of people, so we have some eyewitnesses that we can talk to. The rest of you have not been to China, so what is some of the evidences that you have to know that China exists? Well, one, we have people who say it exists. Two, we have photographs. Three, we have products that say made in China. Right? You see, so that's the same thing we're talking about when it comes to Christian evidences. And what Luke is saying, I'm going to give you some facts. Here's some eyewitnesses of some people who have seen Jesus. Here are some things and some places and things that he did that you can go and see yourself. Here's the empty tomb. Walk over there and put your head in it and take a look. And so we have these things that will help us understand. So he's putting all this in an orderly account. Now, another thing I would like to encourage you, and what we have on the screen here is not only do we have this harmony of the Gospels that I passed out to you that you can use, and use the one in your Bible as well if yours has one, but there's also a graphic or a visual way of seeing this harmony of the Gospels. And in this particular case, they've taken a map and have this map here, and here you see this is orange, yellow, and green. And then as you travel down this chronological time, here's the time frame starting at AD 27 going up to AD 30, the 3 years of Jesus' ministry. And they show where he is during that time. Well, he's down south here in Judah. Then he goes back up north to Galilee. And then this shows all these travel and where he spends his time as time travels through here. And you see how it's also broken up to a period, different periods that they have decided to put the time frame into. So it's a good way of getting your head wrapped around, if you don't mind me using that term, getting your head wrapped around all this information of the chronological life of Jesus. It's important to understand when Jesus says the things that he says and does the things that he does, where are we in the story? Where are we in location? Where are we in the understanding and teachings of Jesus? And so it helps us gain a better understanding of the life of Christ. There are other ways of looking at this. Here you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John represented by 4 different colors. And so you have, here's the Matthew, this is Mark, Luke, and then John's down here. You can barely see it. It's in green. You can't see it at all. It's in green down here. And it's showing you these different periods of Jesus' life. And you can see Matthew, for example, he just shows this one little period. Then he skips all the way over here to this time frame of Jesus. Same way with Mark. He goes even back here. Then he skips way up here. Luke covers much more amount of time, a lot more time, and is more thorough. And then if you could see John, same thing. He's just kind of in between. Now, John does cover, you can't see, but covers this area right here a little more. Again, just a visual way of looking at the life of Christ so that you can get an idea of what was taking place when. Now, one of the key elements, and what we're going to be using in our study, are these timestamps, these certain points in time that are important. And one of those are the Passover. So we have Jesus, his first Passover that he attends or participates in, then the second, third, and fourth Passovers that are mentioned in the New Testament. That's how we're going to mark where we are in the timeline of Jesus Christ. Another way is this, again, a harmony of the Gospels. You have here Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you have it just like what's written that you have there before you with a little bit more detail in the event and a map alongside. All of these I found on the internet. And so they're easy to find. If you'll just put in Harmony of the Gospels or chronological events of Jesus and things like that, you will find all kinds of images and all kinds of websites that will help you in putting those together, and some graphics that you can download and print to put in your studies. Just a very helpful way of helping us understand where we are, because there is no other person, there is no other life more important to study and understand than that of Jesus Christ. Amen?
Amen.
If we want to be like Jesus and we want to be His followers, we need to understand Him and understand every detail that we can that we have available to us in order to more perfectly follow Him. So, continuing now with our chronology that we have, we're going to move on to our third point, and that third point being the genealogical record of Jesus. We're still in the introductory phase of Jesus. We haven't moved into the birth and infancy of Jesus and John the Baptizer, which we will do next week. So right now, we're going to go to the genealogical record of Jesus, and if you look at those columns, you'll see we have now two places that we can go to. One of those is in Matthew chapter 1, and the other one is in Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3, verse 23 through 38, Matthew 1, 1 through 17. And this, the genealogical record of Jesus Christ. I'm going to have someone, if they would, we're going to read Matthew chapter 1, 1 through 17, if you'd be ready for that. But before we do, let's give you a quick introduction to Matthew. We talked about this a little bit in our introductory classes that we had when we compared the four gospel accounts. You might remember that Matthew wrote to the Jewish nation. His audience, or his main focus, was to write to the Jews. And his purpose was to show that Jesus is the King. He is that Messiah that we're waiting for, that they were waiting for. And so he does this by showing all of the prophecies that Jesus Christ fulfilled. And he is the Messiah. So he's trying to convince the Jewish people this is Jesus. When you get to Mark, he's trying to convince the Romans this is Jesus, and he uses a completely different approach. Luke uses a completely different approach talking to the Greeks, and as we've talked about with John, again, a different approach when he's talking to Christians in general. So all that makes sense. And that's the whole purpose of studying this chronological order, so that we can see all of these together and how they relate. And we're going to see a comparison right now between two different points of view, one being a Jewish point of view, the other one being a Greek point of view, just in genealogy. So if someone would read Matthew 1, 1 through 17.
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begat Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab, Amminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Solomon. Solomon begot Boaz by Rahab,
Thank you very much, brother. Now, before we analyze this text, let's go ahead and turn over to Luke chapter 3, verse 23. Now, let's go ahead and admit, how many of you, whenever you get to Matthew 1 through 17, just skip right over that part? All right? Or whenever you're reading along Luke and you get to Luke chapter 3, verse 23, it's like, oh, and you skip right over that part. We do the same thing, and we see this also. Where else do we see lots of genealogies? Where? In the beginning, in the Old Testament. The Old Testament has lots of genealogies. You skip over those parts? They get kind of boring, but you know what's interesting is they have a lot of information, a lot of wonderful information in them. And so it behooves us to not skip over them, to actually look at these because there's a lot of clues. Let's read this real quick, and then we will analyze these two passages. Now, we just read Matthew, and you saw how Matthew presented the genealogical record. Okay, that's from a Jewish point of view. Now let's look at Luke and from a Greek-minded point of view and see if you notice some differences. Now, Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age, being, as it was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Heli, the son of Matthat, the son of Levi. It's going to be difficult for me not to say these in Spanish, by the way. The son of Melchi, the son of Janna, the son of Joseph, the son of Mattathiah, the son of Amos, the son of Nathan, the son of Esli, the son of Nagai, the son of Maath, the son of Mattathiah, the son of Semei, the son of Joseph, the son of Judah, the son of Jonas, the son of Resa, the son of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the son of Neri, the son of Melchi, the son of Addi, the son of Kosam, the son of Elmodam, the son of the son of Hosea, the son of Eleazar, the son of Joram, the son of Mattha, the son of Levi, the son of Simeon, the son of Judah, the son of Joseph, the son of Jonah, the son of Eliakim, the son of Melea, the son of Menon, the son of Mattha, the son of Nathan, the son of David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, the son of Salmon, the son of Nashon, the son of Aminadab, the son of Ram, the son of Hezron, the son of Perez, the son of Judah, the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the son of Terah, the son of Nahor, the son of Serug, the son of Ru, the son of Peleg, the son of Eber, the son of Shelah, the son of Canaan, the son of Arphaxad, the son of Shem, the son of Noah, the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalalel, the son of Canaan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. There is going to be a test. Notice the difference. Quite a difference, wouldn't you say? It's a completely different point of view. Okay, so let's go back to Matthew real quick and let's analyze Matthew in comparison to this. Matthew, being Jewish and writing to a Jewish audience, is writing in a form that is typical of Jewish literature. Jewish literature almost always begins with their history and their lineage. You remember a story whenever the Jewish people were all upset and everything and ready to kill somebody, and all of a sudden he stands up and says, "Brethren, hear me out," and begins naming their history, and they all just kind of stop. You know remember who that was? He was about to be stoned to death and later was? Huh? Stephen, the first martyr. I find that interesting that there's all these people, they're mad, they're ready to stone Stephen. He says, "Brethren, hear me," and he begins speaking their history. And it's like they just kind of all stop for a second and listen. The Jewish people love to hear the history. And so when they recount that history, and this is part of genealogies, it serves many purposes. And some of those purposes are to show, for example, the character of a particular line. These are some of the things that are important to understand about genealogies. They show the character. So, for example, you've heard the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So if that is the lineage of a certain person, then what is your expectation? They're going to act like that person, or typically going to follow that same mindset. And so that's a lot of times the purpose of this, to demonstrate also God's working in history. When we look at these genealogies, do you recognize some of the names that we read in this genealogy? Did it not bring back those stories? Well, that shows you God's working in history with these particular people and helps him to do many different things. One, to form this corporate identity of his people, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. It also shows biological succession. So it shows who's connected in what bloodline so that they can do lots of different things. And that particular one is especially important to the Jewish community for several reasons. Number one, if you remember in Joshua, whenever they get over to the promised land and they conquered all the people, what was then the next order of business? Once everybody's been taken care of, what was the next order of business for the nation of Israel? They were numbered before that. So they're in different tribes. They now have this land. Divide out the land. So it has to do with property. And so you have to use these genealogies to prove who you are. If you want to continue with this piece of land and you are of the tribe of Judah or Simeon or something like that, you need to prove that you are of that tribe, and that's what genealogies do. Second thing, it had to do with the Aaronic priesthood. Only a what could serve in the temple as a priest? What was that? Levites. Okay, only from the tribe of Levites. Only the Levites could be priests, but not all Levites were priests. Does that make sense? So you had to be from the tribe of Levi if you wanted to be a priest, but you didn't have to be a priest if you're from the tribe of Levi. And that was extremely important because of purity and the way that things were set up. That really becomes a problem when they come back from captivity. You remember that story in Nehemiah and Ezra where they have intermingled with the tribes, and so now do we allow these people to serve as priests because they are no longer pure? And he had to dissolve some of those marriages and purify the lineage to clarify. In fact, the ones who could not prove their lineage without a shadow of doubt were considered unclean priests, so they weren't allowed to go into certain parts of the temple. You remember part of that story? Okay. That's a great study then. They're also a way, as I mentioned, of keeping the lines clean. Remember we talked about in this intertestamental period, whenever you have this Hellenization that's taking place, and so the Jewish people were extremely protective of their culture and their lineage. Well, these genealogies would help show who a pure Hebrew was in comparison to all these mixes that were taking place with the Greek culture permeating and infiltrating their culture at that time. And then also, as Joey mentioned, they were numbered. In the book of Numbers, they were put into specific arrangement according to tribes, the way that they camped, or their military order in which they would proceed. So these are all very important things, including your taxes. Whenever they pay the temple taxes, that had to do with it. But the most important thing of all for these genealogies was what? Why would God go through all the trouble to making sure that they protected these genealogies? The Messiah. How do you prove who the Messiah is? The Messiah would come through the tribe of Judah. Okay. So, if Johnny from the tribe of Simeon shows up and says, I'm the Messiah, what's the first thing you can say? Well, you done failed one of the requirements there. You're not from the proper lineage. And so we know that he comes from Judah. Does anybody know what the Judah stands for, that lineage? Typically, what their characteristic was? We talked about characteristics earlier. The royal tribe. Most warrior and royal. That most of your kings, or all of your kings, are going to be from the tribe of Judah. So these are very important aspects. So we have these genealogies. Now, Matthew presents his in three parts. He says that, looking here, the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, from the son of David and the son of Abraham. So he divides it up from Abraham to David, from David to deportation, and then from deportation to Jesus. So he divides it into 3 parts, 14 names each. Okay? And if you look at this, here's that genealogy. Now we're going to take Matthew and Luke's and put them side by side. You can't read that? Let me zoom in a little bit. So you have, at the top is basically exact. They're going to line up perfectly. You start with Abraham, if that's where you're going to start. Luke goes further back, but if you start with Abraham, you're going to have all those that are going to line up perfectly till you get to David. Once you get to David, you're going to see a split. And that's because what happens is you have 2 different points of view in regards to these genealogical records. One of them is going to look at it from the paternal line. The other is going to look at it from the maternal line. One's going to, in other words, from the father, and the other one from the mother. How many of you, when you think about your family history, and you look back when you're talking about great aunts or great grandparents and things like that, you talk about on my mother's side or on my father's side. There's 2 different families that come together. So that's what we have here. And as you move down, then you see here, you go from Solomon. See, David had 2 children, had more than 2, but 2 children that are part of this genealogical record, Solomon, King Solomon, and Nathan, which was Solomon's brother. Then their lineage, as you move down through time, to the point that you actually wind up with intermarriage, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. So that you wind up on the left here with Joseph as a result, and then Mary. And this is how you wind up. This is one of the reasons why having these 2 genealogical records is so important, because you can see the comparison of the 2. Now, why is this important? Well, because Matthew, he's showing it, as I said before, from a Jewish emphasis. He begins with Abraham. There's nobody more important to the Jews than Abraham. And so he shows the relationship of Jesus to the Jews. In other words, he gives the legal lineage of Jesus through Joseph. David's legal descendant. He has every right to claim to be king because he comes from the right lineage. Luke, on the other hand, has a more Greek emphasis. The Greeks are more concerned about man in general. So he ends with Adam to show a relationship of Jesus to all of mankind. He gives us the physical lineage of Jesus Christ through this lineage of Mary. David's carnal descent, in other words. And so we have this legal, royal descendancy, and we have this carnal or physical descendancy. So there's your 2 differences between these 2 different genealogical records. Now, you might have noticed, as we said earlier, we had this intermarriage there. And that presents a bit of a problem. If you back up and just look at this, when we talk about David having 2 children, Solomon and Nathan, and how they wind up down to Jesus. And if you look at it a little bit different way, you can see how they make these arcs, but then they come back together. And if we zoom in on that, what winds up happening is you wind up with Neri. Jeconiah begat Neri, who begat Shealtiel, who married a daughter, Jeconiah begat Shealtiel, who married a daughter of Neri. And through that begat Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel then had 2 children, and that's where the bloodline splits again. So you have this intermarriage between the 2 bloodlines that come together, and then it splits again. So that's how some of these names are lining up in different format. It looks like we are out of time. That was the bell. So next week we will finish up with the genealogical record of Jesus by talking about the prominent women in the genealogy of Jesus, and then we're going to move into the 2 divine births, talking about the birth of John the Baptizer as well as that of Jesus. Thank you so much for your attention this morning. We are now going to take a time to prepare for worship.